At Yorkton, our pea and faba bean trials have suffered pea leaf weevil damage for the last 3 years. This year we finally put together a trial to evaluate the use of seed treatment for their control. While their numbers were greatly reduced this year, they still have a presence. You can see the distinctive U-shaped notching on these leaf margins done by the adults in early spring. However, leaf feeding by the adults is not the concern here. It is their larvae that feed on the end-fixing nodules, which is the problem. Spraying insecticide has not proven to be an effective means of control, since it's difficult to time on the adults, and the insecticide will have no impact on the eggs and larvae which are below ground. Seed treatment containing an insecticide for the control of the pest, or perhaps adding nitrogen to compensate for the loss of end-fixing nodules, are really our only options. In this study, we are determining whether seeding date has an impact on the pea leaf weevil. To my right, you can see our early seeding date, which is far more advanced than the peas on my left, which is our later seeding date. Our insecticide seed treatment being evaluated is Stress Shield 600, and we are also evaluating whether 221 kilograms of urea per hectare can compensate for any nodule destruction. Since pea leaf weevil are highly mobile, each of our plots in this study are 3 times the normal size. One plot is 33 feet wide. Regardless of treatment, our pea crop looks pretty promising this year, but let's check out the results. This study was developed by Chris Holzaffel with the Indian Head Agricultural Research Foundation with financial support provided by the Saskatchewan Pulse Growers. For this video, I'm only going to report on the peas as we didn't participate in the faba bean portion of the study. Participating Agriarm locations for this study included Indian Head, Melfort, Scott, and Yorkton. Here's the treatment list for the study. Seeding was either early, targeting late April or early May, or delayed, targeting at least 10 to 14 days later than the early seeding date. The seed treatments were either Trilex Evergol, which is fungicide only, or Trilex Evergol Shield, which includes the insecticide. The additional nitrogen rate was 110 kilograms per hectare of actual nitrogen. At the 4 to 5 node stage, leaf notch numbers per plant taken from the clam leaf were used as an indication of pea leaf weevil feeding pressure. Essentially, no feeding damage was observed at Indian Head and Melfort. At Scott, there was minor feeding damage. The site that had the highest level of feeding damage was Yorkton, particularly when seeding date for the peas was delayed, as indicated by the orange bar. So much for the hypothesis that delayed seeding might reduce pea leaf weevil pressure. At Yorkton, the use of seed treatment insecticide, in orange, significantly reduced feeding damage on the peas. There is also a similar, albeit smaller, trend for this at Scott. Applying extra N, as indicated in orange, did not appear to have an effect on feeding damage at any site, including Yorkton, where the pressure was high. At Yorkton, a seeding date by insecticide interaction revealed the use of insecticide only significantly reduced feeding damage on peas when seeding was delayed. This makes perfect sense, as pea leaf weevil feeding pressure was much higher on peas that were seeded later. Delaying seeding, as indicated in orange, significantly reduced pea yield at all sites but Indian Head. This reinforces the belief that seeding peas early is a best management practice. The use of seed treatment insecticide, in orange, significantly increased yield at Scott by about 7%. Yield was also increased at Yorkton by nearly 5%, but technically the difference wasn't quite statistically significant. Supplying extra nitrogen in orange only significantly increased pea yield at Indian Head. Such a strong yield response of 29% to added nitrogen was unexpected at Indian Head. With such low pea leaf weevil pressure, it's difficult to attribute the benefit of applying nitrogen to compensation of larval feeding on root nodules. Chris figures the yield may have been due to overall root health and biological fixation being negatively affected by frequent and excessive moisture in June through to the beginning of July. Delayed seeding, in orange, significantly reduced grain protein at Melfort and Scott. However, insecticide seed treatment in orange did not significantly affect grain protein at any location. In contrast, adding extra nitrogen, as indicated in orange, increased grain protein significantly at all locations. I'm not too surprised about that. However, an interaction at Indian Head revealed there was a larger protein response to extra nitrogen for peas when seeding was delayed. Similarly, for Melfort, the extra nitrogen only increased protein when seeding was delayed. The reason for this is not clear. Conclusions. Delaying seeding was not a reliable way to decrease pea leaf weevil feeding, and this practice often reduced yield potential. Extra nitrogen increased yield potential at Indian Head, but it's difficult to attribute this to compensation for pea leaf weevil feeding on the nodules when they had such a low pressure. In some cases, seed treatment containing insecticide did decrease above ground feeding of peas and increased yield. Again, I'd like to thank Chris at iHarf for leading the project and to SAS Pulse for funding it.